Hey there. This is the second video in a series about BYOME by Unfiltered Audio. This video I'm going to focus on the envelope follower, or the input follower as it's called, and the spectral follower. These are two cells that are used to take incoming audio and use it to adjust parameters in the interface. Right now we're listening to a acoustic string, which is a reactor instrument. It's a string modeler, and it's there's a lot of controls. I don't really know how to use it, but I like the random note player. Particularly, I think it's interesting to demonstrate this. I was just going through a filter. It's actually another cell that's interesting to show how the follower works. If we go to Analyzers and Scope, this will visualize what the input follower is seeing. So the blue line's a representation of the audio that's coming in, which is the audio we're hearing. This is the way that the input follower is going to adjust the signal. So if I take the output of X, I can route that onto the cutoff. You can make the envelope follower more smooth or less smooth and have it emphasize the transients more. If you go too slow, it gets noisy and kind of distorted sounding. So this is a cool effect, but it's nothing that you couldn't do in most filter plugins. Many filter plugins allow you to use the input to shape the filter and use an Autowah. So let's take a look at something else you can do that's more unique. So now I've made the acoustic string effect or instrument and reactor a little more noisy. I'm going to switch from the input follower to the spectral follower. The spectral follower allows you to use, instead of amplitude to measure the incoming signal, it uses some spectral algorithms. I'm going to focus on noisiness and tonalness because brightness and darkness it's pretty obvious what those are for. Noisiness, as it says, it's how much noise or unstable frequency content is present. And tonalness is the opposite. It's how harmonically stable the input signal is. So the noisiness you can see is just those beginning bits of the signal. It's really targeting those more. So I'm going to do the opposite of what I did with the sort of Autowah effect using the input follower. I'm going to plug this back into the cutoff and reverse it. An interesting thing with the noisiness algorithm is when you dip down to nothing, it reads that as full noise. That's just how the algorithm works. It's not an amplitude algorithm, it's a spectral algorithm. So you need to take that into account, but I find it doesn't really keep it from being useful at all. So this is cool. Now remember, you can plug this into anything. So just all sorts of weird ways. And also remember, we have this sample rate knob, which actually changes what the filter cutoff is. So instead of using a normal Autowah, let's do an Autowah that uses the sample rate for its wah effect. And I don't know how musically useful this is, but it's definitely a cool effect. And a lot outside of the scope of what most filter plugins could do. So for the next example, I'm going to keep with the filter idea because that's just a really common way you would use an input follower. I have sort of a fairly generic hypersaw patch coming out of Serum and a drum beat. It's just a 4 on the floor thing. So anyone familiar with dance production from the last few years knows about the filter pluck idea. So you can do that really easily in BYOME. I'll have this super saw. I'm going to take audio from the drums. In Reaper, you can do this by dragging from the routing box over top of the interface of a plugin on the track that you want to route to. That'll bring up this routing menu, and it'll automatically go from the main channels on the drum track to 3 and 4 on the receiving track, which is what plugins expect by default in Reaper as a sidechain input. I need to turn off MIDI because there's MIDI coming out of these drums, and I don't want to send those to Serum. And I need to make sure to enable sidechain. There we go. So already that's a lot more interesting. It isn't the most elaborate example, but you can see that it's making this a more interesting sound. You will notice though, it's not really triggering from those hi-hats. It's mostly just the kick and the snare. And the follower doesn't have a threshold to set the specific level for triggering things. So I don't really have any way to try turning up the drums. That's all right. Unfortunately, with the smoothness this low, we're getting some kind of distortion artifacts. But there is a way to have tons more control, and I'm going to go over that in the next video. So hopefully this video gives you some ideas of ways that you could use the spectral follower and the input follower in your own patches and to help your mixing. I think it's easy to get things sounding weird, attaching them to stuff, but there's also lots of surprisingly useful ways that you could use it. And the best way to find them is just to try it out. In the next video, I'm going to specifically go over how to use the input follower with some other modules to extend its functionality. I'm going to be creating also a video series to do a lot of these similar techniques, but with free plugins where possible in Reaper. So if you're interested in these techniques but can't afford or don't want to buy BYOME, you can check that out. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.